Inspiration, Judith, we're going to tell the story. Actually, do two stories tonight. Tonight is also the birthday of the Rebbe Marash. So I heard a nice story in Shul that I'm going to share. First, we'll tell a story of the Baal Shem Tov, Kodesh, as is our custom. So the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe, we know, which is the first Rebbe of Chabad, share a birthday on the 18th of April. And the Alter Rebbe would call the Baal Shem Tov his grandfather, because the Baal Shem Tov was cut his haircut. He cut his hair when he turned 3, which is the custom, and so he would when he asked his mother and his aunt who took him to get the haircut, who's cutting my hair, he said the grandfather is. So we would call the Baal Shem Tov the grandfather, also because he was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. The Alter Rebbe was a student of the Maggid Mizrich, who was a student himself of the Baal Shem Tov. So the Baal Shem Tov was traveling, and he came to a city once. Sorry, the Alter Rebbe was traveling, and he came to a city once. And when he was in the city, he heard that a big property was set on fire. And as much as the soldiers, it wasn't necessarily in the Jewish quarter, but it was a large fire in the city. And as much as the soldiers in the city, there was a soldier stationed there. Maybe it was a time of war with Napoleon. And they as much as they tried to put the fire out, they couldn't. The fire was out of control and it was getting larger and larger. Some way or another, this information came back to the Alter Rebbe that there's the fire in the city, and it's out of control, and they can't get control of the fire. They can't put it out. So the Alter Rebbe went to the place of the fire, and he stood there and he looked at the fire and he started to lean on his stick, which was a custom that Alter Rebbe would have when he was in deep contemplation, and usually when he was kind of connecting to a higher energy, which was on even higher than what the energy, let's say, he was running on regularly, the Alter Rebbe was running on. But we have many stories that he leaned on his stick and kind of to get. And when he leaned on his stick and he was in deep in concentration, the fire slowly went out and or really calmed down, so the soldiers were able to complete putting out the fire. And this was miraculous to the soldiers. So they came back and they told their general or their captain of the story. And he heard the story. He asked if the Alter Rebbe would be so kind to come visit him. So when the Alter Rebbe came in to see this Russian, the Tsar's general, he asked, "I have one question for you. Are you in any way connected or a grandson of the Holy Baal Shem Tov?" So the Alter Rebbe says, "Well, I'm not a physical blood grandson, but I consider myself to be a spiritual grandson of the Holy Baal Shem Tov." He goes, "Oh, if that's the case, I must tell you a story." He said, many years ago, my father was also an army man, and was his regiment or what have you, he was a general, was also in the area of the city of Mezhebush, which we know is the city of the Holy Baal Shem Tov. And being stationed there for a long time and on a long campaign, whatever the campaign was, he was getting agitated because he hadn't heard any news from his family back home. And he was expecting to get letters or what kind of regards from his wife. And he wasn't receiving anything. And he was becoming very concerned. Maybe something happened. Maybe she wasn't well. Maybe she even passed away. He didn't know. He was away such a long time. And he started to get extremely agitated. And in his agitation, he some way or another was speaking to some of the locals in Mezhebush. And one of the Gentiles said, "Oh, there's a holy Jew, the Holy Baal Shem Tov, maybe he could help you." So he said, "Oh, that's a fantastic idea." So it was right before Pesach. And of course, the Jews in Mezhebush were very busy with Pesach. So he sends a delegation of soldiers to the Baal Shem Tov, asking if the general could have a visit with the Baal Shem Tov, if the Baal Shem Tov would see him. And the Baal Shem Tov refused. Okay, so the general knew it was Pesach, and he knew that Pesach, the Jewish people were busy, but he sent another delegation to ask again. And the same delegation received the same reply: "No, you can't, the Baal Shem Tov will not see him." Third or fourth, finally, he became very upset. And the general said the message to the Baal Shem Tov as follows: if he doesn't see the general, then he knows it's Pesach, and he's going to have his soldiers come and bring chametz into every single Jewish house in the city of Mezhebush. So that, of course, got the Baal Shem Tov's undivided attention. And he said, okay, he could come see. So the general with his lieutenant go to see the Baal Shem Tov. And when they were told where his home is, and they go into his home, and as they enter his home, they could see that the Baal Shem Tov is sitting in his office, his door is open, and he's in deep study. Later, he found out that the Baal Shem Tov was studying the Holy Zohar, authored by Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who we're going to celebrate his birthday in the next few weeks. And he was about to go into the Baal Shem Tov, and he sees there's a large mirror on the wall. So he decides to go stand by the mirror quickly to position, to put himself in good order, to comb his hair, to straighten his tie, so he could walk in, respectably into the Baal Shem Tov. And as he comes to the mirror, instead of seeing himself, to his shock, he sees in the mirror that the mirror is showing him outside his own hometown, like a video, like a camera. And as he's looking at it, it's very clear. It starts to go down the streets, and he's looking further and further, and he sees his home. And as he sees his home, all of a sudden, he sees inside his home. And he sees his wife with a little baby, and she's sitting down at the table, and she's penning a letter, and he's able to even read what she's writing. And she's writing to her husband, her dear husband, and she's apologizing for all this time that she hasn't written to him, but she was pregnant. Maybe he didn't even know that she was pregnant. And she had a child, and she had a son. Mother and baby are well, and she wanted to give him all the good news and just apologizing for the long break. And she seals the letter, and then he realizes that of what he's seen, and he calls his lieutenant to come see, watch this, is crazy. They run into the Baal Shem Tov and they thank him, and they go back to their army barracks. A few weeks later, of course, he receives the exact letter that his wife was writing when he looked in the mirror, the exact wording. And the general, now talking to the Alter Rebbe, says, so you see why we're not surprised if you would be a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, that the story is not such a big deal for you to put the fire out. And I want you to know that the general was my father, and the boy that my mother was writing about was myself. I was that little boy. And my father wrote it down, and I have actually in my home the diaries of my father where he wrote the story down in detail, and he offered to show it to the Alter Rebbe, which he did. And so that's a beautiful story of the Baal Shem Tov. It's a well-known story, but like we say, we don't tell stories because we don't know the stories. We tell the stories just to try to live a moment of the story. The second story I heard actually for this Shabbos, again, tonight and today is Bay's Ear, which is the birthday of the Rebbe Maharash. It's fourth Rebbe Chabad. His name was Shmuel Schneerson, and very much connected to the Baal Shem Tov because, like the Rebbe said about the Rebbe Maharash, he had Baal Shem's Maises, that the Rebbe Maharash was also very miraculous. The story goes, so it's not really a story about the Rebbe Maharash, but it was said in the inspiration of the one of the teachings of the Rebbe Maharash, which was lechatchila river. Like when you have an obstacle, you just go all in. You could jump over. You never even look to go under an obstacle. So Rabbi Beryl Lazar, who's the chief rabbi of all of Russia, and Chabad, the first Chabad emissary of Russia, and I think, if I understood from his story that he said yesterday by the Kiddush, he was here in Yerushalayim, was that he was there since 1984, meaning even in the times of Gorbachev. And at the time in Moscow, the Chabad shul was called, I think it's still called that, I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, Marino Rishasai, I think that's how you pronounce it, which is the Chabad shul in Moscow. And so there was some sort of Hasidic, evidently, in 1984, I guess things were a little easier than they were in the early, 10 years before, in 74, but there was some sort of Jewish life and Hasidic life in the shul, and it was the Lubavitch shul, and they wanted a mikveh. And by then, I guess they were also able to communicate with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said that they should, it was in the 9 days, and the Rebbe sent a message that they should build a mikveh immediately. And they kind of thought maybe they're meant to wait till after, but the message was now, which is like an idea of Chatchila Rebbe, just go and build a mikveh. Now, in those days in Russia, it wasn't just a question of building a mikveh. Any kind of raw materials you needed to build a mikveh was not easy to come by. So Rabbi Lazar, and this is Rabbi Lazar telling the story. The story happened with him. He said, so they went down in the street, and if they saw someone with a cement truck, they bribed that person instead of delivering the cement truck to the cement, whoever they had to bring it to the shul, so they could pour the cement into the bore, into the hole. And they needed workers, so they paid they bribed with whiskey and cigarettes the army soldiers to build a mikveh. Now, so we could all imagine that he said that the mikveh was kosher lahalacha. Halachically, it was a beautiful. It was a kosher mikveh, but beautiful it was not. It was just very, very basic. Probably, who knows what kind of tiles, and if there were tiles, it was just really a really basic mikveh. And I don't remember if he was saying that if it was a men's mikveh or a woman's mikveh. I think it was a woman's mikveh. So so they built a mikveh, and they let the Rebbe know that they built a mikveh with the Rebbe's instructions in a way of a chatchila rira, meaning just like, it didn't make sense to be able to build a mikveh. They had to bribe all the soldiers and bribe for the raw materials. It was very difficult. But some way or another, word got back to the Russian authorities that they built a structure without permission. It wasn't so much that it was a religious structure, but more that it was a structure that they did. And, you weren't able to do anything without permission. So they came in and they covered the entire mikveh. They covered it and tiled it, like really said it should never be able to be used to make a statement that don't try to do things without permission. In the meantime, Gorbachev was in Europe, and for some way or another, Chabad with our network, the word got back that the Rebbe wanted a mikveh, and the Russians covered it. So everywhere Gorbachev went, there was some way or another some person that knew the story and asked Gorbachev, "Wait, Mr. Gorbachev, President, if you're saying that there's freedom of religion in Russia, and why don't you let the mikveh in the marina, which is say shul, be open? You covered it." And he's hearing it here, and he's hearing it there. He's hearing it from politicians. He's hearing it from business people. Somewhere or another, it's going. Finally, he doesn't know what they're talking about. He calls back to the main office in Russia. He says, "Listen, I don't know what a mikveh is, and I don't know what Marina Shusay is. I have no idea what you're talking about. This is whatever it is. Go to the shul Marina Shusay, and evidently this thing called a mikveh, and make sure the mikveh is open, because he was getting too much hassle." So the authorities came running to Rabbi Lazar and said, "No, quickly, you open the mikveh." So Rabbi Lazar was smart. He said, "No, I can't. You covered. We did the work already. You covered the mikveh. You have to open it. It's your job to do it." Now that they got instructions from Gorbachev, so they had to build the mikveh properly, and then they had all the raw materials, and they made it beautiful. And so that's like a story of the Chatchila river. When you think things are going to go negative, they really end up going positive. So those are our two stories for tonight. Let's share the page and learn a little bit of halacha. It's late. I know it's late for those in the East Coast. We're holding. Yes, Rebecca, go ahead.
Sorry. Could you explain how the idea of lechatchila riber, like how does that apply when someone has obstacles and difficulties? How would you apply that?
Excellent question. So let's analyze this story for a second, right? So this story was the Rebbe was putting was giving instruction for something that Rebbe Lazar was. Again, I'm hearing the story from the first hand that Rebbe Lazar said it was really difficult. It was really difficult to put up a mikveh. And the Rebbe said to get it done. So, the regular way would be to report back to the Rebbe. It's not possible. But the Rebbe said get it done. So you figure out how to get it done, which means if you have to get the cement to be diverted to be poured into the shul and to do whatever you had to do, you got it done. Now, in a regular person's obstacles, the idea of a chatchila riber, the theme is really that what the Rebbe Marash said in his full statement was that the world says, conventional wisdom is, that when you're moving forward in life, so if you, in Yiddish he says, as megate nicht unter, if you can't go under an obstacle, right? You're walking forward, something's in front of you. So if you can't, you try to go under it or around it, avoid it. That's the point is, you're trying to avoid the obstacle. But if you can avoid it, you can't go under. We want to move forward, and this is an obstacle stopping us. So we have to go over. The Rebbe Marash says, I say, the Chatchila river. If you see an obstacle, you don't even try to go under it. Don't try to avoid it. The Chatchila, go over it. What does it mean, the Chatchila, to go over it? It means that your whole, and it's not just a question of when you see an obstacle. It's your attitude in general in life. How you're, even if you never face an obstacle, God willing, in your entire life, you still have the attitude of the Chatchila river. Means that if anything's going to come in your way, when you walk into a room, you could see a person who walks into a room with the attitude of the Chatchila river. because he or she has this strength that there's a super strong focus. And in life, there are obstacles. But if we have an obstacle, we just jump right over it. And so, depending on what your obstacle is in specific, whether it's in dealing with halachic questions or dealing with struggling in certain laws of Yiddishkeit, or if it's in the material world or it's in shidduchim, where you could sometimes fall into a set of intimidation, where you get intimidated by your circumstances of things that your challenges that you're facing. The Lechatchila Riba would mean that you're not intimidated. Like that, imagine you had the full strength to do what's either right or to move forward or to just not be lazy. Just really have you're superly charged with energy and focus, and that's how you should operate. That's Lechatchila Riba. So depending what the challenge is, okay. So it doesn't mean to be reckless. It means to, and there's a difference between reckless and Lechatchila Riba. Lechatchila Riba means Pashat, you don't allow for the obstacle, which is usually a facade. That's the Medrash teaches us about Avram Avinu, right? That he saw the water, and when he walked in, it wasn't really water. So that was Lechatchila Riba. Avram Avinu saw a river. He had a message from God to go to Akedah. He kept on going. I mean, that's Lechatchila Riba. It means I'm not subscribing to the obstacle, and I'm going to get done what I have to get done. And if sometimes it takes, if it takes really using my brain and my energy in a way that's, me'alim ever beyond, then I'm going to do that. But again, it's an attitude you have 24/7, and it expresses itself 24/7. But when it really comes into play is when there's an obstacle. So again, I don't know what the specific of your question is, but in general, the attitude is for instance, if there's something, if you're confronted with a challenge, whether it's social, how you deal with it, you're not intimidated. Again, that doesn't mean you're aggressive. It doesn't mean that you're reckless. It's a strength that you have, and not allowing intimidation to get into the way. Okay. I hope that helped you a little in your question.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we're holding Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, Siman Yutes 19, which is the laws of the things that we insert into the Shemoneh Esrei, the additions. So we were learning last week about the Masha V'Ruach, Mord the Geshem, and Mord the Tal, which we switch depending on the different customs in the winter and the summer. So what happens again now? We're going to go into the laws if you make a mistake, which obviously can happen all the time, and specifically around now, this time of the year, for those who we just switched over, if you make a mistake and you say Masha V'Ruach Mord the Geshem, or if it's in the winter and you don't say it. So the Kitzur says as follows: Ta'a, you made a mistake. And you didn't say the Masha V'Ruach Mord the Geshem, which is the prayer for rain in the winter. Again, we have two times in davening that we mention rain. There's the prayer for rain and the mentioning of rain. Mentioning of rain is in the bracha of the second blessing of Ata Gibor, which we say God, who is Masha V'Ruach, the wind, and brings rain, as a matter of fact. And then in the bracha of Baruch Aleinu is when we ask for rain. So im nisker koidim shamar bracha machai mesim. So you've the Masha V'Ruach Mord Geshem is in kind of middle of the blessing. So you say Masha V'Ruach, you say Mord Atol, or you don't say Masha V'Ruach Mord Geshem if you don't have the nusach. And it's the winter. It's after Shmini Atzeres, right? This is when we start saying Masha V'Ruach Mord Geshem. So when you haven't yet said the words Machai Mesim, means you haven't completed the second blessing. So as long as you're not mid-sentence and you haven't said yet Machai Mesim, you could just switch quickly and say Masha V'Ruach Mord Geshem. He gives an example. Because Mikhaim Emunasei L'Sheni Offer is a statement. He keeps his so to say his word to those who are lying in the ground, meaning this is a blessing for the dead. So to say Mikhaim Emunasei Masha V'Ruach Mord Geshem L'Sheni Offer, if you actually put it in a sentence, it wouldn't make sense. So you could say Mikhaim Emunasei L'Sheni Offer. You said something, what God does, and then you continue Masha V'Ruach Mord Geshem and go back to the blessing. So that would be the normal way of the addition of the Masha V'Ruach Mord Geshem in the winter, in the event that you forgot it So if you want, he's saying basically, you could go back to Mashav Ruach Amar Geshem and start again to the mid blessing and continue to the rest of the blessing. What happens if you don't remember that you made that mistake until you already completed the blessing? So you have to go back to the beginning of not just the blessing, but the beginning of the whole Shemoneh Esrei, which is back to Magen Avram. Okay. Sheyaschil ata gibor, and it's not enough to just start the second blessing. Ki gimel brachas harishonos kechad achshivi, because the three first blessings are like one. So you can't, if you made a mistake, you have to go back to the beginning. Linin zesh im sima brachas like hoigen tzarich l'reisha tefillah. So in the first three blessings, if we make a mistake, we have to go back to the beginning. Okay. Tov b'mariv shal pesach oy b'shachris. So Shalai Kugan Tzarech Lachser. Tar b'Mariv Shal Pesach B'Shachar Musav Lei Amr Ein Tzarech Lachser. So let's see if by error during the Ma'ariv service of Pesach or during Shachar service or during Musav you fail to say Mashiv Haruach, you need not return to the beginning because that's the day we're going to switch over and stop saying it. We'll see the footnote to give us explanation for why not. Okay, let's see footnote number. Where are we holding? Footnote number 3. I'm assuming yes. According to the Mishnah Berurah, however, if you have not yet said Ata Kodesh, you may say Mashav Ruach and then continue the Ata Kodesh. Okay, so the Mishnah Berurah says paskins differently than the Kitzur and says that if you said Machai Mason but you haven't yet started to say Ata Kodesh, you can say Mashav Ruach Mardigeshem and continue saying. Where the Kitzur says if you said Machai Mason and you haven't started yet Ata Kodesh, you still have to go back to the beginning of Magen Avram. But obviously, if you started out the Kodesh, even according to Mishnah Berurah, you would have to go back to Magen Avram to the first blessing. Okay, let's see. We'll do this and one more law, and then we'll call it a class. This is about why in Shachris of Ma'ariv and Shachris and Musaf, if you didn't say the Mashav Ruach, you don't have to go back. So he says this is because as soon as Pesach arrives at Ma'ariv, Mashav Ruach should be discontinued. However, it is preferable to wait for Musaf when the Chazan public omission will serve as an announcement that Mashav Ruach is no longer said. Again, this is according to the opinions that don't say Morid at all. But this is only preferable in the absence of the announcement. The bracha is not invalidated. So therefore, according to the Derech HaChaim, you didn't do anything wrong because really it stops to be said from Ma'ariv of Pesach. But because we wait for the announcement, and the announcement's in Musaf, so we should then. But that's when we officially stop saying it. But if you didn't say it, it's okay, and it doesn't disqualify the bracha. Okay, let's do one more. Yeshim Kaimis, there's places she'oimrim b'kayitz mashav aruch u'morid hatol. There's some people that have the custom, which Chabad does not mashav aruch matiko, but we say morid hatol. Im tov v'oimer kein gar mechoyref. Let's say in the winter, you say Mashav Ruach Morid Atol instead of Mashav Ruach Morid Geshem. Im loy niskar ad la'ach sha'omer baruch atah Hashem goimer habracha mechaya meisim ve'ein tzarich lachzer b'shvil askar zekevshem. So he says, if you said Mashav Ruach Morid Atol, but you didn't say, and you finished the bracha, you don't have to go back for the Geshem, just to mention the rain. Because you mentioned the dew. Tal is the dew. But if you didn't say Baruch Atah Hashem, so you haven't really officially completed the blessing, and then you would have to say Hashem's name again. So he says, you then should say Moed HaGeshem at the place you left off, where you're holding before Baruch Atah Hashem. Again, in the case that it would make sense in mid-sentence. Okay, let's see number 5. Mentioning the dew is sufficiently similar to mentioning the rain. Okay. All right, Rebecca. Lada Tov, thank you so much for joining. And Tov, take care. We'll see you by next class.